Okay, so in this video, I'm going to go through everything you need to know about Edexcel, A-Level and AS Maths, how many papers there are, what is in each paper, textbooks you should use, the calculator you need, etc. I've already made a video on this topic, but that video is quite old now, so this is an updated version. If you're looking for any specific information, feel free to skip to the relevant chapters you're interested in on the video timeline. So Edexcel A-Level Maths is assessed completely by 3 exam papers. Paper 1, Paper 2 and Paper 3. I'll talk about AS Maths in a moment. The exact days you sit each paper changes each year, so I'll leave a link in the description to the exam timetable section on Edexcel's website so you can see what day your exams are on depending on when you're watching this video. So for each paper you get 2 hours and they are each worth 100 marks. So that means that each paper is worth 33% or 1/3 of your total mark. Each paper has an equal weighting for your final grade. They're all as important as each other. And for every paper you're allowed a calculator. There are no non-calculator papers at A-Level, okay? Now paper 1 and paper 2 are the pure mathematics papers. They assess pure maths, so this is stuff like algebra, geometry, sequences, trigonometry, vectors, differentiation and integration. The content assessed on paper 1 and paper 2 is the exact same. There's no difference between them. They both assess all of the possible topics in pure maths, both year 1 and year 2. Paper 3 is the stats and mechanics paper. 50% of the paper is stats, that's the first part of the paper, and then 50% of the paper is mechanics, that's the second part of the paper. So overall, 2/3 of your grade is based on your pure maths skills, 1/6 is on stats and 1/6 is on mechanics. Okay, now for AS Maths, the papers are a bit different. You only have 2 papers. Paper 1 is the pure maths paper, it's 100 marks and you get 2 hours. And then paper 2 is the stats and mechanics paper. It's worth 60 marks and you get 1 hour and 15 minutes. Like A-Level, the stats and mechanics paper, 50% of it is stats and 50% of it is mechanics. So this is the breakdown of the marks for AS. 62.5% of the marks are for pure maths and then 37.5% is for stats and mechanics. So stats and mechanics is a tiny bit more important in AS than it is in A-Level, and like A-Level you're allowed a calculator in both papers. Now, regardless of whether you're doing A-Level or AS, for your exams you have access to a formula booklet. This is a list of formulas that you can use in your exam if you need them. I'm not going to go through this too much in this video because in my videos I've made on the actual content in Edexcel A-Level Maths, I talk about what formulas are in the formula booklet and which formulas aren't. Any formulas that aren't in the formula booklet, you'll have to remember them going into your exams. I'll leave a link to the formula booklet in the description. Now, for Edexcel A-Level and AS Maths, the textbooks for the course are the Pearson textbooks here. These are actually a picture of the ones I own. Now, these textbooks are amazing. They're probably the best textbooks I've ever seen for any course. They're fantastic, and I'll talk more about why in a moment. Now, inside these textbooks, they contain all of the content that you need to know for your exams. So, for example, here I'm showing you the contents for the Year 1 AS Pure Maths book. Now for A-Level Maths you need to know the content in all 4 of these books. For AS you only need to worry about the content in the Year 1 books, which I've highlighted here. Now you also have something called the specification or the spec for the A-Level and AS course. Now the spec also tells you everything you need to know for your exams. The spec is good for knowing exactly what you need to know and what you don't need to know. So there are parts of the spec where it tells you something that they do expect you to know, so you need to learn it for your exams. But there are also parts where it actually tells you something you don't need to know for your exams, so you don't need to worry about learning it. That is what the spec is quite good at. I'll leave a link to both the A-Level and AS spec in the description. But as a general template for what you need to know for your exams, the textbook is very, very good at telling you that. Okay, one thing to note about the pure maths content is a lot of the year 1 AS content is actually just GCSE content. So here again is the contents for the year 1 AS pure maths book. And of these chapters, chapter 1, 2, 3, 5, 9, 11 and most of 10 is just GCSE content. About half of chapter 4 is also just GCSE content. Now I'm not saying that it's easy, because the exam questions that you'll be asked on this content will kind of be the harder questions you got asked on these topics at GCSE, and they might even push you a bit further, but with enough practice you should get used to it. But you need to have a really good understanding of the year 1 content, because the year 2 content essentially just builds on the concepts that you learnt in year 1. So having a really good understanding of the year 1 content really helps you when you move into year 2. Okay, so in regards to the textbooks, I'm always a bit reluctant giving advice like you have to buy these textbooks, because I acknowledge people have different financial situations. But if you can, I would really recommend getting a copy of these 4 textbooks yourself, okay? You can get them off Amazon, for example, or a lot of the time you can find them secondhand on eBay. Now, the way I got my textbooks is my sixth form bought them in bulk directly from Pearson when I was doing my A-levels, and as a result they could sell them to us for a very good discounted price. I know there are a lot of sixth forms that also do this. I would definitely recommend looking into if your sixth form does this as well, because you can get the books as a result for a very good discounted price. Okay, now the reason these textbooks are amazing is because they are jammed full of practice questions, and they really help you practice and learn the content. Now the way I would advise you do these questions, I'm not necessarily saying you do every single question in every single exercise in the book. There are some topics that are quite easy and aren't necessarily the most important, so I don't think you need to do every question. However, in the book you have questions labelled with an E like this or an EP like this. These are examples of exam questions you could be asked, and I would recommend doing all of these questions for every single topic. They are really good practice at realistic questions you will get in an exam. Now, I would also recommend for harder topics to do all the questions in the exercises, okay? I can't really advise specifically what is the definition of a hard topic, but for example, from my experience, I remember doing the year 1 integration chapter when I was doing my A-levels, and I tried to jump straight into the E and the EP questions in the book, and I really struggled. So instead I went back and I did all of the questions in the exercises for that particular chapter, and it really helped me. It allowed me to build my confidence slowly and develop my skills on the more difficult chapters. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about what calculator you need, and I want to cover this topic because there is a lot of people asking this on places like Reddit, what calculator you need to get, and you get quite a lot of conflicting advice. So if you are coming from GCSE, you likely have a calculator like this here, okay? So this is, for example, the Casio FX85GT CW, and this is fine for GCSE maths, but at A level this will hold you back, unfortunately. There are some things at A level it will not be able to do. The calculator that I and most people always recommend to students is one of the ClassWiz ones. So on the screen here, these are the 2 models. The one on the left is the older model that I own, and the one on the right is the newer model that is sold now. They do the exact same things, they just have a slightly different layout, the 2 models here. Now the new model on the right is sold in a lot of supermarkets. I saw it in a Tesco's near me the other day for £26. However, again, there are a lot of sixth forms that bulk buy these calculators and sell them to students at a discounted price. That's how I got mine at A-level maths. So again, check if your sixth form is doing this. Now, another calculator you are allowed at A-level is a graphing calculator like the CG100 here. Now, this is a more advanced calculator that can do some things the ClassWiz calculators cannot. However, it is a lot more expensive. I had a look on Amazon before this video. It's about about £120. It's really expensive. I know some schools do the same thing where they can offer it at a lower price, but I would imagine this is less common than with the ClassWiz calculators. Now, this graphing calculator, it does have some advantages over the ClassWiz calculator. It has graphing abilities and it's better for solving equations. If you are interested in the specific advantages, Bison Maths did a video on the topic, so go to that if you are interested. My advice on this though has always been the same. The advantages the graphing calculator provides does not justify the more expensive price in any way. I actually don't think this calculator should be allowed at A-level maths, because when I was doing my A-levels, I would not have felt comfortable spending that much money on a calculator, and I probably wouldn't have even been able to afford it. I did my A-levels 5 years ago now, but when I was doing it, everyone just used the normal ClassWiz calculator. From my understanding, the vast majority of students still just use the ClassWiz calculator, and it's perfectly fine. Unless you really want to spend the money, I wouldn't advise it at all. Even if you're doing further maths as well, you can just use the ClassWiz calculators in the middle. The price is really not worth it in my opinion. Okay, now for Edexcel A-Level and AS Maths, you have quite a few past papers available to you, okay? There's quite a few websites that have them. I personally find them on Physics and Maths Tutor, which I'll link in the description, and I have it on the screen here as well, okay? So here's paper 1, here's paper 2, and here is paper 3, okay? I would recommend having a go at all of the past papers before your exams for your revision and doing them in exam conditions, because this will allow you to practice your technique and your timings, okay? There are quite a few channels on YouTube that have done past paper walkthroughs that are useful. I did 2 videos for the 2023 papers, but they didn't really do that well, so I probably won't do any more. But I think Mr. Asprey and Maths with Dan are particularly good for past paper videos. They both have quite a few more subscribers than me, so it's very likely you're already aware of them, but if you aren't, I will link them in the description. Okay, so I just want to give you some final tips on how to approach the Edexcel A-Level and AS Maths course. So one tip that really helped me during revision, not just for maths, but I actually did this for all topics, is listing your mistakes. So I've done a video about this already, but when I was doing my A-Levels, let's say I made a mistake in a question. I used the wrong method, or I approached the question wrong, or I forgot something, any sort of mistake, I would have something called a corrections book, or I would sometimes use a Word document as well. Any mistake I made for a question, I would make sure I understood exactly where I went wrong, and then I would write it down in my corrections book. And then every once in a while I would flip through this book to remind me what mistakes I've made, and this would really help me not make the same mistake again. This really helped me in stopping making the same mistakes over and over again, and I became a lot better at answering questions. Okay, so I just have one more tip that I want to mention for A-Level Maths revision. So at the start of A-Level Maths, a lot of the mistakes that I was making and a lot of the marks that I was dropping were just mental maths errors. So when I was doing algebra, I would add something up wrong and get the wrong answers. For example, I would have something like 47x plus 34x plus 11x, and I would figure this out in my head, and for example I would get out 94x, and this is the wrong answer. The answer to this is actually 92x. This is how I lost a lot of marks, with small mistakes like these. My mental maths at the beginning of my A-levels was really bad, and this is how I lost the majority of my marks in practice questions. So if you also struggle with this, what I would recommend is when you are doing revision and practice questions, try and use your calculator the least amount that you can. So if you're doing a question and you have to do something like 134 plus 67, rather than just plugging this into your calculator, try and figure it out in your head. Now at the start you'll find yourself probably dropping more marks than you normally do, as you're figuring out more maths in your head instead of using the calculator. But if you stick with this method, and I found this out kind of in about a month, my mental maths got a lot better, and I almost never lost marks due to mental maths problems at the end of my A levels, especially with the easier problems. My mental maths got a lot better by doing practice questions and revision like this. Okay, now there are two advantages to this method. One, as I've already said, your mental maths gets a lot better and you stop losing marks to mistakes like this here. But the other big advantage to this is when we talk about exam technique and exam timings, the big pitfall that a lot of students fall into is just putting everything into their calculator. So every single sum that they are doing in a question, they put it into their calculator to make sure that they're getting it right. Okay, I think a lot of people would be surprised how much that eats up your time in an exam. And if your mental maths ability is good and you're not having to put everything into your calculator, it can really save you time during an exam. Okay, so that's pretty much all you need to know, I think, for A-level maths. I've made content on all of the pure side of Edexcel A-level maths. This year I'm also releasing some stats content, and I'm also going to be redoing some of my old year 1 videos, like this one here, for example. So keep an eye out for more of these.